So now it begins, right? So we continue with the cultural influences of the 18th century, Well, we'll begin with the English euphoria, with the English enthusiasm about Peter the Great. When Peter the Great came, he was quite unusual. He was a very interesting person. Nobody before that had behaved like him. He was the Tsar. He was almost, well, very soon he's going to become the emperor of the great Russian Empire, of which the English know little, we have to confess. But they do know that this is a rich country. If not a militarily great power, it was still very rich. And imagine such a person coming and working with his hands. He mastered something like 15 professions on his great embassy and later, manual professionals. And he was somebody who was brought up to work, to live in luxury. But he comes, he rubs shoulders, he communicates with common people, he drinks with them, he participates in parties with them, he works along with them. He's not ashamed to study from them, to learn from them. He looks at them and says, show me how to do it. So he is quite a prodigy, he is a wonder, right? And the English were very much enthusiastic about this, with this very democratic mood, very democratic vibes. And then when Peter defeated the Swedish, when he created a great Russian industry, when news came to England about the English great trade and the English benefits and preferences in Russia, they were very much excited about the new Russian emperor. And that sparked an interest in England for Russia. And for example, in 1716, we see a book by John Perry, The Russian Circumstances, the Condition of Russia under the Current Tsar. And then later, well, you will see that the English started to write poems about Peter. Well, they were fond of writing poems about everything, and about Peter as well. So that's what James Thomson wrote in The Season of the Castle of Indolence, 1744. Immortal Peter, first of monarchs, he his stubborn country tamed, укротил, her rocks, her fens, болота, her floods, her seas, her ill-submitting sons, упрямые непокорные сыны. And while the fierce barbarian he subdued, to more exalted soul he raised the man. So he subdued the barbarian in Russians, and he brought forth the soul of man. Sloth, лень, безделье, flies the land, goes away from this land. And ignorance and vice, so he drove away ignorance and sloth and vice out of Russia. Of all dishonor proud, it glows around, taught by the royal hand that draws the whole. One scene of arts, of arms, of rising trade, for what his wisdom planned and power enforced. More potent still, his great example showed, that he showed by his own example how to do it. So they were quite enthusiastic about Peter. And later on, at the end of in the second half of the 18th century, the English wealth also started to increase. Remember, England and Russia became empires at roughly the same time. We'll speak about that later when we speak of the macro trends in Russian-English relationships. And the English were gaining a lot of colonies at the time. They reigned the seas. So a lot of wealth started to flow in for the English, especially for their nobility. And English people started to travel. That became a custom, that became a fashion, to travel to the continent, to see around, to expand your education by looking at Italy, at France, and at Russia as well. So people started to travel to Russia. And in 1780, William Cox writes, account of the Russian discoveries between Asia and America. In 1795, Matthew Guthrie writes, Dissertation sur les Antiques de Russie, in French, because French was an international language of the time. In 1798, William Tooke writes Life of Catherine II after her death. So the English start to find out more about Russia. And some people travel to Russia, and a lot of them start to leave quite benevolent, quite favorable accounts of their travels to Russia. For example, Dr. John Cook writes, I'm not ashamed to declare that I honor Russia to my own country. And William Cox writes, the richness and splendor of the Russian court surpasses description. It retains many traces of the Asiatic pomp, blended with European refinement. Andrew Swinton writes, it inherits a soul that darts its light through the mist. He writes about the Russian people. He writes, the soul of a Russian muzhik inherits a soul that darts its light, sheds its light, shines its light through the mist. So by this metaphor, he wanted to show that the Russian muzhik's appearance might be not so glamorous, but it does have its light. I never saw a people so good-natured and so very polite with all. See how it goes against the usual stereotype of the English against Russians. So when the English start to find out more, not by word of mouth, not by passing impressions, they start to see this beauty of the Russian soul. And but of course, there were other people in all times who were still quite wary, and that probably originates from the fear of the English that Russia was going to become a great power, and they were afraid that it was going to threaten English interests. So, for example, Daniel Defoe, he wrote in one of his pamphlets about the ignorant Muscovites. But he also, and this is something that we don't know, Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe. You all know, right? When he was on an uninhabited, on a desert island, right? Robinson Crusoe, right? Have you read it? Yeah. But you don't know that there is a second part to Crusoe's adventures, and they are in Russia. He wrote about Robinson Crusoe's adventures in Siberia. And for example, when he describes Crusoe arriving at Tobolsk, this is Crusoe arriving at Tobolsk. He wrote, here I observed ignorance and paganism still prevailed, except in the Muscovite garrisons. And Jonathan Swift, what did he write? Jonathan Swift. Gulliver's Travels, right? And he was very upset when he learned that about the Russian victory at Poltava over the Swedish king. And he was quite unhappy by the misfortunes of the Swedish king. And in the works of Swift, there are places references to Russia. And I think both of them were spies as well. And this is a documented fact that I think Defoe and maybe Swift as well, they were English spies.